morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're fortunate today to have three distinguished speakers sharing with us their experiences on skills development and assessment. Before I give the mic to the first speaker, at the beginning of time, humans learned a few skills, sometimes by chance, sometimes by trying a few experiments. And then they started to pass these skills from one to the next. And over time, they realized that there was an urge or a need or an advantage for formalizing these skills transitions from one individual to the next or one generation to the next. And the reason for the formalization was to capture the previous learnings and to maintain a certain level of quality that was deemed necessary for these skills that were taught. That was the beginning of the journey. The journey went through a lot of phases of continuous formalization and standardization for skills propagation and assessment. Until today, where people believe that we may have overdone this. We may have over-formalized and over-standardized the way we propagate the skills to the extent where schools, universities, and institutes are producing graduates that may not be very easily able to get reskilled or upskilled or change their skills given the continuous and the rapid changes in economies and in the job market and so on and so forth. With that short introduction, I would like to invite the first speaker. We have Dr. David Cortes, who has worked in Australian universities as a teacher and a researcher for over 25 years. He has served at the Australian Council for Educational Research and at the National Centre for Vocational Educational Research. He's currently the Director and Principal Consultant for Transforming Education in Australia. He's the author of over 50 papers and book chapters, and he's also an adjunct professor, associate professor at Flinders University. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Cortes to start his presentation.
Thank you indeed for your welcome, and I'd also like to congratulate the organisers on this very superb conference. The organisation has been quite extraordinary, so thank you indeed. What I want to do in my paper is present to you three propositions. So the first proposition is that future skills are constructs that need to be defined very carefully in order to make them teachable. So the second proposition that I want to put to you is that if we're going to effectively develop future skills, they must be integrated within the curriculum. They should not be added onto the curriculum as some new subject or set of assessments. So I'm going to argue that they need to be integrated and deeply embedded. And my third proposition is that they must be assessed. If you don't assess them, then students simply won't value them. But the assessment has to be formative. So my approach is on the development of the skills rather than on assessing whether they have been developed. So the propositions that I'm putting to you are about the development of skills among students. I'm not concerned at the moment about the summative assessment of skills at the end of a course. Now, my position is not in opposition to that form of assessment. In fact, the propositions that I'm putting to you are complementary to that approach. The final thing that I want to do in the presentation is show you an analysis of the way that future skills can be identified in the labour market at the moment. And so that will be brief. Just a very quick comment. The slides are not advancing.
Can you have the slides here on the screen?
I've provided a PowerPoint presentation, and I hope you'll have the opportunity to download the presentation, because I'm not going to speak to each of the slides.
Can you point this way with the pointer and see if the slide will continue? There it is.
Okay.
We're almost there. We're getting the first slide. We just need to click the screen button.
Okay, thank you.
What slides here, sir?
Yeah. Okay, so that's the outline of the presentation. So I do invite you, if you have the opportunity, to download the presentation, because there are, in addition to some of the slides I won't speak to today, I've got quite extensive notes to support the argument that I want to present to you. Let me move on. Okay. So I want to start just with a very brief comment about the various generic skills or future skills schemes that have been implemented internationally. So I did a survey of international future skills schemes over about the last 25 years, and I found schemes such as SCANS in the United States, core skills in the United Kingdom. We've had several schemes in Australia, but about 40 countries have had future skills schemes over the past 25 years. My analysis of those schemes and the conclusion that I reach is that, frankly, most of those skills have failed to get traction within our education systems. And I think this is of great concern, because we've invested enormously in the development of these skills, but they have failed to have an impact. So, and I think the reasons for I'll discuss in 1 second the reasons for that. One of the things I will add, so we're looking at Vision 2030 in the Kingdom. Have a look at the OECD website, because the OECD has a scheme called Education 2030, in which they're trying to develop their version of future skills. It's very early days at the moment. There's very little information available, but do have a look at those skills at the OECD 2030 website. The point that I so that's just a quick summary of some of the generic skill schemes that have been around. But as I said to you a moment ago, there've been about, in 40 countries, there've been various skills, and several countries have had 2 or 3 attempts to get a generic skills, future skills scheme going. Now, so this is the set of future skills that I believe is under consideration within the Kingdom. And so one of the, what I want you to do is to, in this construction of these skills, I've identified really 2 clusters of skills. So the inner circle, which includes thinking skills, using technology and so on, are the more cognitive skills. The ones in the outer cluster, self-management, responsibility and so on, are perhaps the less cognitive, more effective skills. What I would say to you is that if we're going to develop an approach to disseminating, embedding these skills in our education system, we need to be completely consistent about the way we go about it. So the system that we use for, say, thinking skills, the way we teach them, the way we assess them, the way we develop them, we should use that pattern when we look at the other skills. So, for example, if we then say, well, I want to assess adaptability, then we should use a consistent approach to the development and assessment of adaptability, the same approach that we would use in relation to thinking skills. The second comment I would make about this is that when you're going to get started with this, pick the easy ones first. The ones in the outer circle, adaptability, self-management, are actually the more difficult ones. So don't try them first. Okay, the easy ones. If you look at thinking skills, for example, I would break thinking skills down further. For me, the critical skills within that thinking skills group are things like problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. I'm going to use problem solving as an example of a method that, to illustrate a method that you can use. So, the main points, so that the reasons that I think generic skills schemes have failed to gain traction in the education system is that we need to select the skills. What are the skills that we're going to assess? And then we need to define them. Selection is easy, and that's been done. Definition is difficult, and in general, that has not been done well. So the first point I'm going to make is really about the definition of skills. The next pair of issues, disseminate and implement, but how do you get these skills into the education system? How do you get teachers and students to agree to them? I don't think that's so problematic. I'm going to pass over that. Integrate and assess are the next pair of issues that need close attention, and that's what I want to focus on today. And finally, how do you get people to certify the skills? So when somebody graduates from a university course, how do we ensure that the institution is able to certify that the student has acquired these future skills? And then how do you get, for example, employers to recognise the certification that is offered by institutions? So I'm going to pass over this particular slide because I want to... Okay. What I want to do is use problem solving as an example of one of the thinking skills. And I want to show you the approach that I took in some research that I did. So I did some research in the development and assessment of problem solving skills. I did that in 2 vocational courses and in a university course in engineering. So I want to share with you the approach that we took. So and I want to use this example to illustrate the proposition that I put, that we need to conceptually define each of these future skills very carefully. So in order to do that for problem solving, the first thing is say, well, what is your theoretical basis? What do you think problem solving is? And so I looked at the literature on problem solving, and there are a number of different theoretical models that you could choose from. Now, those models are not equivalent and they're not all equally useful. For example, quite frankly, my position is that a behaviourist approach to problem solving is completely unproductive for our purposes. Similarly, the Gestalt model isn't very helpful. What I did was said, I'm going to base my work on an information processing model of problem solving, theoretical model, because that enabled me to generate a description of problem solving that was accessible to teachers and to learners. So what I then did was said, okay, well, if we take an information processing approach, do we have a description of problem solving that we can use? So in my case, I said, okay, I looked again at the various frameworks that were available, and there's a fairly high degree of consistency among the frameworks, but I chose the Bransford and Stein model, which is called the ideal problem solver. It's a nice piece of marketing. So it just says, well, okay, problem solving has 5 processes. The IDEAL, you identify the problem. If you can't identify a problem, you can't solve it. So the first stage is identification of the problem, definition and exploration of the problem follows, exploration of alternatives, actually attempting the solution, trying it out, and then looking back or reflecting on the success or otherwise of the problem solving. So this gave me a framework, and based on that framework, I developed a rubric that could be applied. And as I said, I applied that rubric. The same rubric was applied in the engineering course, an electronics course, and a business studies course. And the same rubric worked across those disciplines. So I think that this approach gives you a fairly generalizable rubric that can be used in a number of disciplines. It needs to be trialled further. It's okay to say, well, it worked in engineering, it worked in electronics, it worked in business, but we don't know if it's going to work in nursing, for example. So we need to do some more work on that. So the first point I want to make is that if you're going to teach a future skill like problem solving, then you need to define it just as carefully. If I ask you to go into a biology class and to teach about photosynthesis, then you have to have a model of photosynthesis. You can start teaching that at a very elementary level. You can teach that, and you can do that in an elementary school, but you can teach about photosynthesis in graduate school, because then you can get into the molecular biology involved in photosynthesis, and so in other words, you can actually have a learning progression from a very early stage to a very advanced stage. So that picks up the point that Patrick Griffin was making this morning about the need to develop learning progression so you can identify where learners are in that progression and then move learners through the progression so that they develop the skills to an advanced level. So the second issue that I want to get to is now the next two propositions are that the the development and assessment of future skills must be embedded or integrated within the curriculum. If you try to add it on, it will fail. It must be embedded. So I'll show you how we can embed it. So with the problem-solving example, what I did when I went to, say, the electronics course is I said to the teaching staff in that course, I want you to make a list of all of the subjects that you teach in this course, and then in each subject I want you to make a list of every assessment task that you set students. So they did that. I said, now I want you to look at every assessment task and I want you to tell me about a task that will enable students to demonstrate teamwork. To then list the tasks that they could use to demonstrate, effective communication skills and effective problem-solving skills. So then we had a list of all of the tasks that they thought would be a good place for students to focus on problem-solving. So, for example, one of the existing assessment tasks, the students were given a circuit board which had some faults, and the students' job was to diagnose what was wrong with the circuit board and then to say what would need to be done to repair that circuit board. So that they were given a problem which they had to solve, so they had to apply a problem-solving method to that. Now, the critical thing about the embedding is the course already had an established way for assessing students' performance on that problem-solving task. So that was all about understanding the electronics. So I said to the staff, I want you to continue to assess that task exactly as you do now. Change nothing. Then we said to them, now here is a problem-solving rubric. We want you to apply this rubric. So basically you assess the task a second time. So it got assessed for the students' electronics knowledge, but then it was assessed for students' problem-solving approaches to that problem. Now, we did two things in that assessment. We gave the students responsibility for the assessment. So the first thing the students had to do was they had to use the rubric and assess their own problem-solving performance. So when they handed up their assignment, they gave the teaching staff, here is my electronics assignment, as they've always done it, and here is my self-assessment of my approach to problem-solving. Now, in this self-assessment rubric, in addition to the student saying, well, this is how I identified the problem, and this is the level that I've achieved, the students had to tell the teaching staff, and this is the evidence that I can give to you that shows you that I appropriately identified and explored the problem. The job of the teacher then was not to give the student a mark for their problem-solving performance. Their job was to validate the student's self-assessment. So if the staff member thought, yes, your self-assessment is an effective judgment about what you've done, then the student's judgment was recorded. If the staff member disagreed and said, no, you actually misunderstood the problem, you think you understood the problem, but you misunderstood it. So then the teacher gives the student feedback about what was ineffective about their approach to problem solving. So by giving the students that formative feedback about their problem solving, they were learning how to go about solving problems. In other words, we weren't just assessing the skill, we were developing the skill. So the critical point about this process is I'm interested in how we can make sure that when students graduate from the course, they actually have the skill. They don't have a mark that says how good they are, but they have the skill. We interviewed students at the end of the course. We also interviewed some employers of the graduates. The students' comments were, one of the students in particular, a mature age female student, said, actually, you know, having gone through this exercise, I recognise now that I was already a good problem solver, but you have given me a language in which I can describe what I do. So that was actually powerful learning for the student. When we interviewed the employers, when they interviewed the graduates, would ask them to describe your problem solving. They said they were absolutely surprised by the extent to which graduates were able to describe their approach to problem solving. So the employers were very impressed with the quality of the graduates. So two points about that is, the first point is that we embedded or integrated problem-solving development and assessment within the existing course. So we didn't add any new assignments. We did add a rubric that was used with existing assignments. So it was integrated. And secondly, it was assessed specifically, and students got feedback and therefore were able to develop their skills. So that's an example. So I think if I can go back over the 3 points. In relation to problem solving, we had a very solid conceptual definition that enabled us to develop a learning progression for problem solving. That learning progression then was applied in a rubric. The students were able to self-assess. Through self-assessment that was subsequently validated by their teacher, we were able to focus on the development of the skill. So it was conceptually sound, it was integrated with existing assessment, and the skill was developed. So I think that's a thank you. Now, I'm going to...
There's still 5 minutes in the speech.
So, thank you for the endorsement of that section of the speech. The final section is very brief, but I just want to share with you, so one of the questions that I've had is, well, actually these are future skills, but how do you know that skills like problem solving are required in the labour market? So these are, while they're future skills, they're actually current skills. They're skills that are acquired right now. So what I did, I don't have data on the Kingdom's labour market, but the US has a very excellent data resource on labour market requirements embedded in the ONET database. So I went to this database. So in the US, they have listed about almost 1,970 odd occupations, specific occupations. For each occupation, they have a list of knowledge and skills and attribute requirements. There's about 160 elements in that description for every occupation. So 970 odd occupations, 160 skills requirements for each one. I then mapped all of those 160 skills requirements against the Kingdom's future skills framework. So I was able to estimate what level of skills were required for particular occupations. And okay, so for this slide, I've just shown 3 occupations. So on the left, this is so the communication, information literacy, thinking skills, and so on. They're 7 of the 8 future skills. I could not map into cultural understanding. So I haven't displayed that here. But for the other 7 cognitive future skills, there's a profile. So on the left, I've got nursing. And you can see, and it's completely unsurprising, of course, that for nursing, the future skill that is in the highest demand, that's most important in this occupation, are the personal and interpersonal skills. If I contrast that with engineering, you'll see that the skills that are in high demand there are thinking skills, especially critical thinking and problem solving, and using IT. So you can see the profile for engineering is different from the profile for nursing. That tells me that if I'm going to develop future skills in an undergraduate program for nurses or for engineers, my focus has to be different. Not wildly different, because of course engineers do need interpersonal skills. They just don't need them as much as nurses need them. Okay? And then the third one, I wanted to pick typically a vocational occupation. So you can see that for waiters, the total level of skill is lower than is required for the professional occupations, completely unsurprising. But you can see for waiters, the skill that is most important, unsurprising, personal and interpersonal skills. So the message here is the future skills are now. Okay, we can map them. So, and I'll leave it there. So thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Cortez. You got endorsed twice, so that's. The next presentation we have is by Dr. Manuel Corpus. Dr. Corpus is the founding president and the executive director of the accrediting agency for chartered colleges and universities in the Philippines. He's currently the executive director of Philippines National Network of Quality Assurance Agency. Dr. Corpus is known for having spearheaded the adoption of institutional accreditation in the Philippines. Today, he is referred to as the father of accreditation. He has paved the way for the outcome-based quality assurance. He was instrumental in more than 80 programs of accreditation and training, and in retraining about 900 accreditors, and you can imagine how much that propagates into the society and the system. He served as the president of Cagayan State University and as the president of Don Marino Marcos Memorial State University and as president of the Philippines Association of State Universities and Colleges. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Corpus to start his presentation. You can I'll turn it on.
Good morning to everyone. Good morning to our members of the panel and the very prestigious members of this conference. I am new this is my first time to be in Riyadh. I'd been to Abu Dhabi, and at one time I was invited by Oman to organize their accrediting or quality assurance agency sometime in 2003. I would like to start by explaining why I am speaking from the chair. But I was told when I was in college that never start your speech or presentation with an apology. So I will not apologize yet. I have really been wondering why I was invited as one of the speakers for this very important conference. My field is quality assurance, and the assessment of skills is only one of the segments of quality assurance or the accreditation or quality assurance of programs, not just particular skills. I do not know anyone from this organization, but probably I have met some of you in the Asia Pacific Quality Network conferences where I serve at present as a member of the board. My presentation is quite simple. I like it to be very practical. When I was invited to be here, I surmised or I guessed that probably you have invited me because the Philippines is one of your major source of imports for skills. Unskilled labor, skilled labor, or semi-skilled labor. And so I thought that might be the reason why I am invited here. So my presentation will run something like this. I will explain first why is there a need for skills development in the Philippines, brought about by the pressure of a large population with a equally large unemployment level. Then I will talk about the education system in the Philippines, where skills development and training is probably unique in the sense that it is separated from the other educational system, which are basic education and higher education. And so skills development is actually placed side by side as a ministry, just like education and higher education. And it is a ministry in itself. That is how it is given that much importance. I will talk about how this ministry, we call it TESDA, undertakes the training for vocational and educational training, and what are the skills that they develop, what are the modes of development, and the method of assessment. And finally, I will talk about future skills, where at present we are still in a very undeveloped stage, considering for instance, the progress in the implementation of Industry 4.0 or Education 4.0. I'll also give some suggestions on how Saudi Arabia can select better workers for your employment in Saudi Arabia. Well, let me say first that we have separated training skills development from formal education. Our formal education for instance, professionals like engineers, nurses, information technologies, medical doctors are separate. They are under the formal education system. But the skills development, meaning as defined by the UNESCO, which says that skills development is an education and training form for practical purposes to enhance the employment capability of the workers. And it is in the form of formal education, that is, if it is undertaken by the schools, and non-formal education, if it is undertaken as short-term training activities. So that is how we define technical, vocational education training in the Philippines. Let me see. Where are we now? Okay. There you are. While I was preparing for my paper, I happened to read in the advertisement of one of your papers. And a well-established company in Makati, that is our major city for financial purposes, is in need of the following: bookkeeper, technical sales agent, CNC milling programmer and operator, tool maker, machinist, welder, automotive. There is nothing important or special in this, but it points to the present skills needs in the country today. Now, if you are talking about future skills, these are not the future skills that will be needed, say, 5 or 10 years from now.
Can you advance the slides, please?
This is the UNESCO definition of technical vocational education and training, which is my focus of a presentation. I will not talk about formal education like training for engineers and so on. A UNESCO definition, education and training to acquire practical skills, formal or part of school system approach, or non-formal out of school system. Oh, yeah. This is the basic nature of educational system that I mentioned earlier. Basic education under the Department of Education, which is the first 12 years of basic education. And then you have higher education, which is under the Commission on Higher Education, which is for degree programs and upward graduate programs. And then the third one, side by side, and these are all ministries, technical vocational education, under the TESDA, Technical Skills and Development Authority. TESDA is the one that is mandated to undertake technical, vocational, and technical and vocational skills education. What does the TESDA, or the Technical Education Development Authority, it has developed a program we call TVET, Technical Vocational Education Training, with 70 courses. Examples of these are shielded metal and welding, electrical installation and maintenance, electronic servicing, automotive servicing, refrigeration and air conditioning servicing. Maybe some of you are imagining that you have met some of my countrymen who are engaged in these types of skills in your country. The modes of delivery used by the TESDA. We have what we call the school-based. These are accredited by TESDA. These are based on schools, usually state universities and colleges. And the schools offer what we call non-degree programs. We have developed what we call a ladderized program, where you have the first part will be technical skills, and then the later part will be the professional skills for degree programs. If the degree program, for instance, is electrical engineering, the first three programs, 3 years, might be on practical electrical engineering, while the fourth year program will be for a degree program. So we have only the non-degree program in the schools. This is important because I will explain later that most of the programs undertaken by TESDA are not undertaken by TESDA itself. It is outsourced to other components of the society. You have the center-based stage program. These are short duration. These are the programs that are actually conducted by the Technical and Education Skills Development Authority. And then you have enterprise programs like internship and apprenticeship carried out by firms and industries. Then community-based, these are programs to meet the needs of the community to facilitate employment. Let me show you.
Just tell them to go to the next slide.
The training outputs by modes of delivery. I showed you 4 modes of delivery. These school-based programs are the non-degree programs offered by state universities and colleges, and they comprise about 40% of the graduates in 2017. The center-based, which is the TESDA itself, is only 15%, while the enterprise-based, or these are the firms, conducted by the firms, are only about 2%. The community-based, these are in the communities, compose the biggest group. But these are short-term skills like, for instance, how to repair refrigerator, how to repair a computer unit, or installing electrical system. These are those in the base, community base, which are undertaken by private organizations which are supported by TESDA. As of 2000, this is the report. As of 2017, the question is, how are these programs assessed? How are they examined, given examinations, and certified as competent graduates? As of 2017, the Technical Education Development Authority had 4,255 assessment centers. These are in schools of technological schools, but are certified by the TESDA. Certification of competency. This is what I would like to emphasize. If you are recruiting skilled labor or skills from Philippines, you look for this certification of competency. We call them NC2 or National Competency 2, Cultural Competency 3, or National Competency 4, for those who pass the standards. This is very important. You should look for this if you are hiring workers from the Philippines, because they are the ones certified to be really possessing the competency required in your work. In 2017, 1,410,000 were assessed, but only 1,185 were certified. All the training programs can apply for certification or can apply for assessment. Whether they are conducted by TESDA or not, they can apply for certification. But they have to pass the standards of TESDA. Now, if they are assessed by TESDA and they are certified to be qualified, then you are assured that you have a worker whom you would like to recruit to be possessing the competency that you desire. TESDA assessed. Now, probably this you do not know, that we have, that even right here in Saudi Arabia, we have assessment and certification of workers. In 2018, this is on May 8, 2018, TESDA assessed and certified 76 OFWs, means overseas Filipino workers, OFWs. We call our workers here, Filipino workers, OFWs, under the Tibet program that I mentioned, in Riyadh and Kubar. And these are in computer system servicing, technical drafting, and virtual graphic design. Next. Now, future skills. What are the future skills that we forecast in the Philippines? Let me tell you that the forecast that we have in the Philippines is quite conservative. So, if you like to recruit workers from the Philippines, you might as well tell the Philippine educational system what are the future skills that you need. As of now, our bases are only the Philippine Qualifications Framework and what you call Industry 4.0. You must be very active already in Industry 4.0 because they predict future skills. Some of the skills predicted in the 4.0 are the ones mentioned by Dr. David mentioned earlier. But aside from that, they forecast other skills because the Industry 4.0 is the stage, is the industrial revolution for cybernetics. Now, among examples in the Philippine study that are forecast in the next 5 years are only the following: civil engineering technology, which is not very new; graphic arts and painting technology, you already have this; welding engineering technology; wellness and medical tourism, you already have this, and we are still predicting this, that this will be the skills needed in 2015. So if you rely on the future skills developed in the Philippines, you will not be given the right or the updated skills development, skills required. You have to help in identifying the skills that you need in your country. And the educational system will adapt them. Next. Now, future skills. As I said, our references for future skills are number one, the Philippine Qualifications Framework. You know the framework. It is a ladder of skills from level 1 up to, in the Philippines, up to level 8. And in the vocational education program, it is up to level 4. Now, there is a study that I have gone across with, and these are the top 20 skills you have to develop in your career. These are the analytical skills, research skills, self-confidence, ability to work with others, and these are the top 20 skills required. And in a report on the future skills development in Southeast Asia country, report for the Philippines, Dr. Dilara and Dr. Hoxon, for some of the skills include mechatronics. I don't know if you have already, probably you have that here already. Mechatronics technologies and management skills. Next. Suggestions. In recruiting labor, ascertain that the future employee has a certificate of competency from TESDA. That is if you are recruiting from the Philippines. And then this probably you do not know, or probably you are very much aware of it. Make use. There is a foreign skills training institutions agreement with the Philippines. And these are between Saudi Arabia and the Philippines, Qatar and the Philippines, and Australia and the Philippines. You can make use of this. You can get assistance from them. Now, this is a nutshell of the topic given to me, skills development and assessment practices in other countries. I presented the one in the Philippines. Now I would like to mention and make my apology. I did not make it at the beginning because you must not start your presentation with an apology. I am here, this is the first time that happened in my life that I came to a country in a wheelchair. I was invited here and I was determined to come because you have already invested so much in me. When I arrived at the airport for check-in in Manila, I was called to the medical office, and I was told check my blood pressure. They said you are okay, but they said you have a vertigo. But the vertigo, they said, will last only for 24 hours. It's now more than 24 hours, and I still have it. And that's the reason why I'm in this wheelchair. I apologize for this. I'm not used to this, but probably I've been working too hard. Last week, I just came from Timor-Leste, where I also helped them in their training in quality assurance. I was in Indonesia, and I was in Malaysia for the last month. And probably I got tired too much. I hope I will be cured in Saudi Arabia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manuel, for a practical, detailed presentation, and wish you get very well soon, and you go back home far healthier than you came here. The third speech is by Carlo Palmiero. Carlo is a technology manager at the National Institute for System Evaluation. He's an expert in school systems. He's in charge of transitioning the national testing into computers, and he deals with international projects for the definition of national test systems and national exam standards. Without further ado, Carlo, you can go ahead, please.
Good morning to everybody. Thank you for the invitation here in Riyadh. So I will present you the Italian case in assessment. I would like to follow the slides.
You can just tell them next and they will switch to the next slide. They'll show you the slides in a minute. If this doesn't work, just say next.
Next.
They'll take you to the next slide. Just tell them next.
Next.
Yeah, awesome. That's it.
Yes. Okay. Okay, today we will spoke about the Italian case, how I said before, and especially the national computer, in these 5 parts, the national computerized testing system, in Italy, of course, computer-based. The aims of the computer-based testing system, the skill assessment at individual, school and system level, impact on learning and teaching, and further developments. How you can see in this scheme, we test for our students only 3 subjects. Italian, mathematics, and English. You can see that we test not every year, but every course, but grade 2, 5, 8, 10, and 12, and 13, sorry. 13 is the last year of up secondary school. So we start from grade 2, they are 7 years old, until grade 13, before the university, they are 19 years old. If you can see on the second part of the slide, we administrate tests in computer-based in grade 8, 10, and 13. But in grade 2 and 5, they are too little, and we continue to use paper and pencil until 2022. Then we will switch all subjects and all students, every grade, in computer-based testing. Yes, next. Okay. Some characteristics about our tests. The tests are administered at census base. There are about 550 students for cohort, for year, for age. The tests take place entirely online. Why online? Because in this way we reducing the technical requirement of the computer, because we have to update only the browser, not the memory or the capacity of the computer for using USB sticks or to do computer-based but not online. This is offline. But in this way, online we reduce the requirement of the computer, and the computer-based tests are based on item bank, from which different tests are drawn for each discipline, and which share the same characteristics of structure, content, difficulty, and length. The computer-based tests don't take place on the same day, because it's impossible to think that in the school, with, for example, 200 students, they have 200 computers. In it's not possible. And if we tried to use on census base in one day, it means that the students has to have 550,000 computers. So it's not possible. And we share this time in a window that was assigned to each school according to the number of students, of course, of the number of computers available. The return of results in terms of qualitative descriptor was done for English is connected with the SEFR, the standard European reference test. The student, they have to make a test, but we had 12 different tests from our bank item, and these different form of tests were assembled according to the rules that guarantee the measuring equivalence. And the items, of course, there are many more than those that we administered for a single student. In this way, we noticed that we have also a strong reduction of cheating. And the results, we give the results with a description of the degree of the skills and the knowledge that the students reached. About the aims of the computer-based test system, we can say that in this way we set up a modern, efficient, and flexible test system. Paper-pencil tests are now far from the digital world in which the students live. And also for the assessment tools, we tried to let them to be consistent with the general education skills. About also the aims of the computer-based test system, we can have, I would say, 3 different levels. For instance, a system level is to create a flexible and economic testing system that is able to increase the accuracy of the measurement of the achievement according to the national standards, and also to quickly provide measures to promote the improvement of learning and to promote the equity of a national education system. About the aims a school level, we create a reliable longitudinal testing system that can provide each school with the results of the students related to the skill required by national standard. This school, I am speaking about class and student level. And then also a measure of value-added school effect and other performance indicator for the self-assessment system, because this is mandatory for every institution, private institution and state institution. At student level, we create a standardized national certification system. At the end of the law, grade 8 and upper grade 13, grade 8 is the last year of the primary school, and 13 is the last year of the upper secondary school. Each student, but also parents or other stakeholders, can have a comparable national certification of competencies for three fundamental subjects, Italian, Math, and English. Because in this case, it doesn't depend from the school or from the teacher of one class. They are standardized and correct in a centralized unit. In this way, it's possible to shift the attention of the entire educational system from the school marks to the level of skill actually achieved by each student. Now we speak about the skill scale. We used the Rush method, and using the Rush analysis method, the student's performance and the level of difficulty of each question of the item bank are placed on the same scale. In this way, it's possible to compare the results of a student with all the bank items, even if only a few have been administered to a particular student. If you see this picture, you can see, how said my colleague yesterday, that we can put in the same line the ability of students and the difficulty of items. Another step of the skill scale is that the scale of results is divided in 5 levels. And the Rush methodology lets us to describe each level of result related to the degree of competence possessed by students who reach that level. The levels of result are described in relation to the national standard, Italian mathematics, and to CEFR for the English language. In addition, each level of result is accompanied by a set of questions released each year from the item banks. This allows teachers to design teaching activities to promote learning in close and direct relationship with the national standards. Sorry. The level of result can be used by teachers for their classroom activity. They provide concrete examples of how to move from one level to another through the questions assigned to each level of result. This approach can be very useful for identifying the proximity levels of development of each student. This can be very effective in promoting a concrete improvement of skills. In fact, very often for teachers it's very difficult to concretely establish what activity to do with the students, starting from the so-called proximity levels. For new and further developments, we try to improve technical aspects. For instance, online administration at sensor level has been a success, but it's also necessary to let it more solid. Why we have the problem with the school, for instance, for internet connection, because these tests need a large bandwidth. So we try to improve this kind of delivery. Another improvement is about the scale of the results. We are rewriting the item bank with new questions to make the description of the levels of result more solid and precise. The more the relationship between the descriptors of the level of result is closely linked to the national standards, the more it is possible to promote the development of skills prescribed by national standards. Also about teacher training, teachers training should be promoted at central and local level because it's not easy for a teacher to understand and to describe competencies at this level. So they have to be formed. That's all. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. And now I'd like to open the floor for questions. If anybody has questions, we'll start with this lady. تفضل هنا.
السلام عليكم دكتورة من الشيخ جامعة الإمام عبد الرحمن بن فيصل. I have a comment actually for David Cortes regarding what you described about developing problem-solving skills. It's an excellent experience, and the beauty of it is that it's an example of assessment for learning. So students were learning or developing their problem-solving skill while going through assessment, and you were actually hitting two birds with one stone. So not only you achieved improvement in problem solving, but you achieved reflection. In medical education, we have a great emphasis on reflective practice and reflection on learning. So what you said about students describing their development in problem solving, and that student who said about the language is actually a reflective practice, which I find is very useful. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. Thank you indeed.
Other questions? There are two here in the front. There's one in the back. Actually, three in the front. So if you could start.
Assalamu alaikum. Abdullah Al-Wazra, Associate Professor at Imam University. I would like to thank you all for your great presentations and the knowledge that you provided for us today. My comment and question is to Dr. David. You talked about integrating future skills required by a labor market in higher education, or as you call it, tertiary in Australia. And I'm wondering if we can integrate these skills required by labor market in the K-12 system, and if it's possible, how would we do that? Thank you.
In which system? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Okay, yeah.
Public school system.
Okay, thank you. I'm very keen to extend the research that I've done in this area. So I've done the research in higher ed and in vocational education. I would like to extend it into the school level, and particularly at the moment, I think into secondary. That's an open area. Once the rubrics are developed, I think that they may need to be adapted, particularly if we go into the junior secondary levels. They'll need more adaptation. But I'm very keen to extend that research, and so in fact if there are any researchers here who would like to join me or would allow me to join them in this research, I'd be very, very keen to do so.
Okay, there's a question here, but before that question, I have a question for Dr. Manuel. Dr. Manuel? You were looking there. I got a question for you. Me.
Him.
I have a question. So I was wondering, how critical is it to introduce work ethics into the technical assessment of these potential future workers, and how can we do that? How critical is it, and how can we do that?
In our accreditation, work ethics is one of the meaning skills, knowledge, and values like work ethics. Right now, I must say that in the skills development program under TESDA is more on the practical skills rather than on the work ethics. The work ethics is in the formal education system, from basic education, that is grades 1 to 12, and of course in college. Not much in the skills development program.
But do you see value in introducing it, or should it continue to be kept at the public education system, the formal education
Yes,
system?
it continues.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum, Ali Shamari من جامعة تبوك. Thank you so much all for the great presentations you gave us. My question is for David. I like the example of problem solving you shared with us and how to define problem solving, and I think that's very important. Here in Saudi Arabia, and I think it's the same in Australia, we use game-based learning a lot for problem solving as an effective way to teach problem solving. Early in your presentation, and correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned or you said, when you talked about the theoretical perspectives, you said that using a behaviorist approach might be unproductive. Now, in game-based learning, we know that games and play in general are, in fact, behaviorist. What's your comment on that? Thank you.
Yeah, my approach has been very cognitive, and I think you can, it seems to me that you can understand the findings of behaviorism in terms of cognitive theory. What I was looking for was a theory that is what I would call generative. In other words, if you look at the theory, does that theory enable you to predict the behaviours that you wish to observe? And behaviorism fails. I'll come back to that in a second. One of the things that we look at in problem solving is the issue of transfer. So when we look at identifying a problem, exploring options, and applying the possible solution to see if it works, the behaviourist model will work up to that point. What we did beyond that in the rubric was we implemented items that tested students' monitoring behaviours, which are cognitive and not predicted by behaviourist theory, and their reflections. And it was the latter two that discriminated most between, say, an average student, someone who is just able to do the immediate task, and those students who were able to internalise what they had learned and then apply that subsequently. So I did some rash modelling on the score, the scoring that we did with the rubric, and as Patrick said this morning, it was quite reliable. But the difficulty levels of the monitoring and reflection items were much higher than the difficulty levels of the other items. So, and it seems to me behaviorism fails because it doesn't predict, and therefore it's not theoretically productive to describe monitoring and reflection behaviours. And that's why I particularly wanted to use, say, the information processing model, which is highly cognitive. And that's where information processing models also have an advantage over some of the other models that I was describing, not just behaviorism.
Other questions? There's a question here in the second row, please.
My question for Mr. Carlo. My name is Manal Twaji. I'm a teacher for students with specific learning difficulties. Actually, it's quite interesting to have this kind of testing system. I would like to ask if you're offering special procedures for students with dyslexia.
Thank you for your question. We are speaking about standardized tests. So if we have students with special needs, we are not speaking about this. For instance, we succeed in help the people with the problem with dyscalculia, and also they are not able to read very well. We provide a software that, for instance, can read and can read every word and also light the words, so the student can see, for instance, can hear and see lighted the word that is listening. So we try to do this, but of course it's a very large a plethora of people with special needs, so it's not possible to help them because we are speaking about standardized tests.
A question here as well?
My question
And then you,
to
and then
Dr.
there.
David. You have suggested many possible future skills clusters, and one of them was the intercultural understanding. Can you suggest an assessment or an approach to assess that skill?
I just missed that point. Which particular skill did you refer
The
to?
intercultural understanding.
Yes. I must say that's one that I have not addressed yet in my own research, but it's a particularly important one. And let me just as an aside say, when I looked at the US labour data, there's nothing in any of the US labour data that refers to that at all. So that's a huge gap. And I think that's very instructive to see that that gap exists. Bearing in mind that those US labour descriptions were updated a few years ago. They're being updated this year, so that may come in. I think that the thinking I've done about intercultural understanding at this point is that there's a very strong knowledge component to that, and I think that's a part that could readily be addressed, but there's an affective component that needs to be addressed as well, and that's going to be the difficulty. So it makes it a really interesting research challenge. So I hope you want to take it up.
We got a question in the first row, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Hussein Kinani from Jeddah Education, exam project development. I'm asking Dr. Carlo about to give us a brief summary about how you did your item banking in this stage. Thank you, sir.
If you look at our website, you can see the rules that we follow to realize this bank item. We have a group of psychometricists people who try to check after pre-test of the question how it's possible to put in which level of the line that I described you about rush methods. So there's a scientific follow steps that you can find on our website of Invalsi. I'm not a psychometrician, so I'm not able to give you exactly the process to do this question, but you can find everything on our website.
Thank you.
Question here.
Rush model.
No, rush model for which grade you did? You have many grades.
Yes,
For which grade?
Okay, we did for grade 8 and grade 13.
Okay.
So I'll take a question from row 7, and then I'll take one final question from the ladies' side from row 5.
Ahmed Al-Munaf from University of Hail. I guess my question is for our colleague Carlo. When you talked about equity and reducing cheating in this CBT test you do at the moment, do you actually, those students face the same question in this cohort of 500 and 500,000 students? Do each student have a different set of questions, or does it kind of is the same question for all? Or, I mean, we want some clarification on that. And the other thing is, how is the Italian community or society accepting CBT in lieu of, losing out on the skills of writing and, computer has really killed the nice calligraphy that, the Roman had. Anyway, I leave it there and.
Okay, thank you. Carlo, please.
Okay. I answered the second part because it's more easy, and then we go back to the first part. For the second part, in Italy, we have a big success because it was a rule of the state. It was a law that said that the tests should be administered computer-based. So there was a law of the 2017 that said this. So we have an help to accept to the families and the stakeholders that they have to. We have to administer tests in computer-based. For the first part of the question, I said before that they have 12 different forms. One student has not the same question of the other one next. So it's not possible in a class of 20 students, there are 12 different forms. So only 8 students has the same form, but these students also, the forms are different because the questions are not in the same order, are put in different orders, so it's not so easy.
Okay, so the last question.
Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for wonderful presentations. My name is Heba Kushaim from Prince Sultan University. And my question to Mr. Carlo, regarding the tests that you explained going from grade 2 up to grade 13, to what extent the grades of these tests will affect admission to higher education in Italy?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part of the question.
To what extent the grades of these tests that you give to students affect admission to higher education, to universities and colleges?
Yes. I think that I said before that we test only 3 subjects, English, math, and Italian. If the university, for instance, has to be a test of English, that is already done. So the university has, there's no law that says that the university has to follow what the secondary school, the certificate the secondary school gives. But of course, they look at them. So for Italian, math, and English, a standardized tests can offer the university the possibility don't do their own test. For the mission, for instance, because the students are already tested in upper secondary school.
All right, thank you very much. So before we conclude, I'd like to ask the panelists to join me in thanking such a great, active, and engaged audience. And then on behalf of the conference organizers and the audience in the room, I'd like to very much thank the panelists for enlightening, informative, and outstanding speeches and Q&A sessions.
On behalf of EC and Scientific Committee, we would like to say thank you to our guest speaker and thank you for our manager today. Thank you, Dr. David Curtis. David Curtis is one of the experts that has helped us in our proposed national framework for employability skills. And from the Australian framework of employability skills and the scans, which is the Security Commission of Necessary Skills of United States, we have moved to our proposed Saudi future skills or employability skills. So thank you, Dr. Davis, for your critiques and evaluation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Manuel Carpus. Thank you, Mr. Carlo Palmero.
Thank you.
شكرا للإدارة المتميزة دكتور أحمد وشكرا للانضباط بالوقت. شكرا لك.